everyone, and welcome to another video from the team here at BlenderTech.com. That's BlenderTech.com. Don't forget to like the video and to subscribe for more Blender, Unity 3D, and programming videos. The team adds at least one quality video a day, if not more. And lastly, don't forget to remember, create your way. So do you remember these shapes we created? And we created them into one group. And on the first layer we just have completely empty except for the camera. What we're going to do today is we're going to be looking at creating a particle system with these shapes. It's going to be an introduction to the particle system. If you already know how to use the particle system quite well, you might want to skip over this to Particle System Volume 2 where I show you some really cool tips and tricks. However, I always say a refresher never hurts. Learning is always a good thing. I always watch intro to whatever videos over and over again just so that I refresh my memory sometimes. So I've got a new microphone set up. Currently I don't have a desktop stand for it still. I'm gonna have to go to Home Hardware and create some sort of system so that it'll be set up a little bit closer to my mouth. So hopefully the audio quality is good. If it's better than the previous videos, let me know. If it's worse, please let me know so that I can go back to my headset. But I am using a real microphone with a pop and hiss filter. It seems to be working okay. So again, let me know how the audio quality is. Like I said, I'm going to try to get it set up a little bit better. But if the headset was better, then I will go back to that. It did seem to have more noise on the headset though, and it was very uncomfortable. But anyways, let's get started on Particle Systems Volume 1. So as we had before, like I said, we had our 5 different shapes and we've created a single group out of them called simply shapes. They're in the shapes group. So these are all in one group called shapes. Shapes, 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 shapes. Right there. So they're all in one group. As you can see by the green outline, that means they're in a group. So we're going to be using them to create particles using these shapes. So why would you want to do this? Well, you would want to do this because that way you can create a particle system with any shape you want. If you wanted snow falling, you would create some snowflakes of different sizes for your shapes, and then you use that for your particle system. If you wanted to create falling cats and dogs, well, you'd create some cats and dogs as your shape, and you'd group them, and then you use that for your particle system. So anyways, since this is just going to be an introduction, we're not going to do anything too fancy. I'm just going to show you kind of how the particle system works and how we apply this group to this. So if you don't remember how to create a group, or if you don't know, then watch the previous volume. If I remember, I'll add an annotation to the previous video in here where I described how to create and why we use objects. Excuse me, my mouth is dry. I'm just going to drink some of my Andrew Price rated coffee. Oh, it's still strong as ever. Oh man, is it strong. Anyways, okay, so yeah, we have this group. And we need to create a new particle system. So for that, we're going to go to our render layer because we want our particles rendered on, well, our rendered layer, obviously. So let's just go into front view. Let's move the cursor to the center. And let's just create a plane. I'm using a plane because the plane is the most basic shape out there. I'm going to just rotate this along the x-axis 90 degrees so that we can see it from the front view. I'm going to scale it up 3 times. Yeah, 3 times. A plane is the most basic shape to emit particle from. So I'm also just going to move this up along the z-axis 3 times. Yeah, so that's right along the grid floor. So yeah, the reason I'm using a and the normals are backwards, so I'm going to rotate along the Z 180. There we go. Now the normals are the right way, I think. So anyways, the reason I'm using a plane is because, like I said, the plane is the most basic shape to create particles from. Your particles are basically going to emit straight out of this one face. A plane is one single face, so it's going to emit straight out of there. If you had a cube, it's going to emit out of all 6 faces, for example. And that's where things can get more complex, and that's where things can get cooler. But for now, we're just going to use a simple plane. And a plane, most of the time, will do what you want to create. So on your plane, we need to create a particle system. So the particle system is this little star icon in the properties panel. So click on that, click new or plus, whatever, and create a new particle system. You can call it anything. I'm going to just call this shapes emitter because in this instance we're using an emitter type. You can also do hair, that's it explains what hair does. It's for creating hair on objects, but we're doing an emission particle system in this introduction because we want our shapes to be emitted from this particle system. We also want to split our window so that we have a timeline so that we can see what our particles are doing. So I'm going to set my timeline up. As you can see, nothing's happening right now. We just have basic particles being emitted. You can see them being created for 250 frames. Now, I like to work in 300 frames at 30 frames per second. So this brings us to our first thing. So under emission, since we're using an emitter particle system, you have your start and end. This is your start and end frames. So I'm starting on frame 1 and I'm ending on frame 200 right here. So that's where the frames stop emitting, is right at frame 200. And then you can see at frame, let me go back to frame 200. You can see right here is where they're stopped emitting, and then if you watch very carefully the particles, you'll see them start to disappear and fall away as I move forward. And by frame about 235, 225, somewhere in there, but by 250 they're completely gone. As you can see, we have no particles. That's because the end was frame 200. That's where they ended their emission. So I'm actually going to change that to, let's change it to about 75. That way all the particles will be emitted by frame 75. So let's see what that does now. Let's see how that changes the particles. So let's just quickly scroll through. So you can see they're being emitted, and they're falling because of gravity. They're getting emitted, more is getting emitted, but we're getting up to frame 75. And at frame 75, they're finished emitting, and now they're going to just fall and slowly die off. And they're done. So, another thing to pay attention to is the number. That's the number of particles. So right now we're at 1,000. Let me change that to 10 to show you the extremeness that this can be. So right now we're only going to emit 10 particles. Let's see what that does. So as you can see, we only have a few particles now. Just the odd little one pops out till frame 75 and then they're gone. So that was only 10 particles. That is an extremely low number. So by default, as we saw originally, it was 1,000, but that's also quite a low number. Let's try 10,000, more of a higher number. You can already see that's quite heavy. So let's see what that does now. So if we hit play, you'll see we now have a ton of particles being emitted, and then at frame 75, they stop being emitted. So that's a bit too many for what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to stick it around 500. Let's see how that looks, since we're just going to be using shapes and not just simple particles. So yeah, that's just a nice number of particles. I like that. So the next setting we're going to be looking at is lifetime. So if you hover over lifetime, that says lifespan of the particles. So how long these particles are going to last. So if you add up 75 plus 50, you get 125. You can see just down here, right at the very end, right at frame 125, that you can see just there's this very slight red line. That shows that the particles are dead right there. This is where they end their lifetime. So if I change this down to like 50, you can see it goes all the way to 100 because 50 plus 50 is 100. So at frame 50, they're done emitting, and by frame 100, they are dead. So lifetime is how long your particles are going to last. So if we leave our emission back to 75, if we change the lifetime to say 150 frames, watch what the big difference is now. See how much longer they last before they die off? See how long they last? Like they just keep going and they take forever to die off. They're finally dying off there. So they're dying off at around, well, I can't do the math. I can, but about 225, yeah. 75 plus 150, yeah, 225. Why couldn't I do that math? So lifetime is important. Lifetime in this instance, I'm going to set to be about, let's try 20 frames. Let's see what that looks like. So yeah, as you can see, they're emitting, they're falling, and then they're dying off pretty quickly. But you can also, this random value is what makes things really interesting. I'm going to crank it all the way up. Now check it out. Now Since my random is all the way up to 1, you'll have some particles that die instantly in 1 frame, and you'll have some particles that last all the way to 20 frames, and some all the way in between, because our random is all the way at 1. So watch the difference now. As you can see, some are dying quickly and some are lasting longer. Their lifetime is a little bit longer, so it kind of explains itself. But like I said, we're going to leave it at 75, lifetime about 20. We're going to keep the randomness at 1 just to make things interesting. Velocity, this is a good one. So normal basically tells you, okay, this plane is going to give the particles a speed of 1. So let's change this to 0 to see what that does. So if I press play now, as you can see, they're just dropping straight down off the face, right? But if I change the normal up to like 8, watch how they get shot out. See how it gives them some normal or some velocity off the face's normal. So that's what that option does. But I'm going to leave that at 1 just because it's a good standard setting. You also have emitter object. As you can see, let the emitter object orientation give the particle a starting speed. So if we change x to about 12, I believe this is measured in meters per second, hit play. As you can see now, they're getting shot way off in the positive x direction. So they're getting shot to the right. If we give it a negative number, let's go negative 12, they'll get shot off in the other direction. I gotta restart here. See how they're getting shot off in the other direction now? So that's what those values do. So you could, I think, like I said, I had my axis is reversed before. So if we chose y and gave it about 12 positive, now it should do about what I was thinking. Yeah, see how they're shooting up now? But they're dying off so quickly that you don't see them fall back down. If we gave them a very long lifetime, if we gave them a lifetime of the full 300 frames and turn the random down to 0, you would now see that they get shot up and they go down. And I think if I go from side view, the effect is more pronounced. Let's let it play one more time. Shot up and they go down and last the full 300 frames. Okay, so hopefully that explains those values properly. I'm going to set them back to what they were. What were they? I think the lifetime is 20, randomness of 1. Notice how this is in real time. It changes it. That's a good thing. Until you start doing your actual rendering and animations, everything's in real time. So it's a very good way to preview what the settings do. So it's actually very easy to learn, but we don't want any starting velocity. We just want the normal velocity. We just want them to be slightly shot out a little bit out of the face. In fact, let's move it up to about 3, just so that they get shot out a little bit further. So you would use these settings if you were doing something differently. If you had, say, if you were doing a grinder animation and you wanted sparks being flicked out really fast, then you would obviously change these. Another thing, randomness here, give the starting speed a random variation. So if you crank this way up, some will be moving very slowly and some will be moving very fast. Let's see how that does. Let's see how that changes this. See how it's completely random now? Some are just going all over the place. I obviously went way too high of a value. Let's try a random of just 2. So you'll see now how some are going further and some are going shorter. I think a slightly higher value will illustrate this. Maybe about 5. So hit play. Yeah, you can see how they're going in different directions. They're getting emitted in random directions. So that's what that random value does there, is it sets the random emission. It makes all these values here random, but I'm going to set that as 0 because we don't want any randomness to that. Physics is another important one. You've got mass, so the mass of the particles. So if I cranked it up to 15, you would notice that the particles are going to fall a lot faster. The size of the particle. This is why it's very important. Right now it's at 0.05, but if we change that to 1, watch the major difference. Okay, since I haven't created a particle object yet, you don't see the difference, I believe. We will get into that later. We'll leave the size as it was, 0.05, but you can choose random size too. We will be getting into that. Forces, Brownonian. So that's the amount of random erratic particle movement. So you can crank this up and It'll again give the particles kind of just a random erratic movement, exactly as a tooltip exclaims. Again, hard to kind of see, but you can see how it's a little bit kind of erratic and random compared to how they were before. It'll make more sense once I actually apply the group to that. A die on hit, that's another important option. Basically what that means is if your particles hit something, like a deflector object, something with physics basically, they're going to die instantly. I can't think of an example off the top of my head of where you'd use that, but it is something that you will use. What next? Under render. So this is where you can give it a material, you can parent it to stuff, you can create trails, you can have particles that trail the original particles. So see how the particles have trails now? So that's what trails does. So that's kind of a cool option. That's something that you will be using. And you can also give that randomness. So if I give that some trails and I go random, watch now. See how some have different size trails than others? So that's, again, randomness is the key to particle systems because it's going to make them interesting. The rest I'm not really going to get into too much. But this is where we're going to get into our object group. So show this object in place of particles. So remember we created our object group called shapes. We would use a group, but let's just start off with a simple object. So let's say we wanted all cubes to be emitted. So we would choose cube. Let's watch what happens now. As you can see, now just my cubes are emitted. And what it's doing is it's selecting, if we go back to the last layer, it's actually using this cube right here. So if I size this cube way up, and then go back and play it again, watch the obvious difference. Well, you can see it already. Now the cubes are way bigger. So you can create just a single shape and you can use it as your emission particle, but we're gonna undo that like that. Okay, perfect. So yeah, you can do that for any object. You can have spheres, so that's great for like raindrops and stuff. And so obviously you get the idea. Any shape that you create, you can use as your particles. And this is where you can also change the size. This is where I messed up before. So this is the particle size. So it starts at 0.05, but if we crank it up to 1, now you can see my spheres are instantly bigger without changing the original object. But that's a little bit way too big because it started off at 0.05. So let's multiply that by 5. Let's go 0.250. So you can see now that it looks like bouncy balls essentially, and it would be if I created a collision system for them to collide with. But check out random size. If we turn that up to 1, now some are going to be size 0 and some are going to be size 0.250 and some are going to be in between. So let's hit play. Check that out, pretty cool, eh? Now it looks like bubbles. So again, another cool object to play with. But what I wanted to get into, let's change the size back to 0.50 for now. And the randomness to 0. We're going to go to group. Line creates lines based off your particles. See how it creates these weird line effects? Like you can do all sorts of weird things. Like you can create arrows this way. So you could create a cool scene almost like from that, what's that Chinese movie? Oh, I can't remember, but it's where all the arrows fly through the air. Or even in 300 where it's the arrows will blot out the sun. You know, something like this would probably have been what they used to render that. But we are going to be focusing on groups because that is what we started with. So remember we created a group called shapes? Let's see what this does. So let's hit play now. You can just barely see, but notice how it's emitting all of my shapes that we created. If I zoom in, you'll see it more. It's emitting, let me pause it at 1 frame. See how it's emitting my cubes, my cones, my triangles, my cylinders, and my spheres, all 5 shapes. So that's where it gets interesting. You can create different objects in a group. So say you wanted to create an asteroid system. You would create rocks of different shapes and sizes and you would have it emit them. And then you would have basically like an asteroid group being emitted, an asteroid belt almost. What are some things we can use in here? Oh yeah, the size. So the size again works exactly the same. So if we bump this up to like 0.150, you'll see how much bigger they change. And random size, bump it up to 1. You can see some are tiny, some are big. Let's move that to about 0.75. So let's see how that looks now. Pretty cool, eh? Now don't forget, you can still animate your objects individually. So we could go to our original group and we could create materials. I should have done this earlier, but I'm going to do this now. Let's make our cube. Let's give it a material. I just did diffuse. Our cube is going to be blue. The cylinder, we'll make it, we will make it purple. The cone, we're going to make that, say, pink. Why not? Nice and bright. The sphere, we're going to make it red, orange, yellow. We'll make it yellow. Kind of this orangey yellow. And the triangle, we are going to make green. Bright green. Actually, I'm going to change this to yellow. I'm just going to use kind of the primaries here. Notice how I'm dragging and dropping the colors into the viewport color. If you didn't know that trick, that's one to pick up very fast because it's very useful. Yeah, I'm going to make this one kind of a bright hot pink instead. And this one I'm going to turn red. See how that... Yeah, I like that. And this blue is a bit too... I'm going to make it more of a regular blue. Alright, so now we have our different colors for our shapes. And you can give them whatever kind of materials you want. It's going to affect your render speeds, obviously. But now if we go back to our original layer, check this out. Woohoo! We got... I don't even know what to call it. Graffiti or something. This would be a way that you could create that effect where you see like that New York scene where all the confetti's falling. This is kind of how you would create that effect. So yeah, anyways, back to our plane with the particle system. What was I gonna show? The use count settings. This will allow you to adjust how much of each object in your group appeared. So let's say I wanted a ton of triangles compared to the rest. So I would take my plane, which happens to be a triangle, I would turn the count up. See how now I have almost all triangles? Let's change it from 50 to like 5. So see now how I have a ton more triangles than anything else? So that's another important setting to think of, is use count. Also, pick random. That just randomly picks objects. Since we already have random objects, it really doesn't do a lot, but that's another important setting to pay attention to. And whole group at once. That just emits the entire group out as a single part. Each particle is the whole group. As you can see, each particle count is the whole group. So if we turn our particle count down to 1, yeah, there, oh, where is it? There you go. So you can see we just have our 5 objects. If we change it to 2, I don't know if we're going to be able to see this. Oh, you know what it is? It might be the randomness. But if we change this up to like 5, you can see how it's emitting just 5 whole groups. So I'm going to change that back to, what was it? I can't even remember now. 100? But anyways, that's what whole group does. So that's just a few things to think of. So that's basically what I wanted to show you on the intro to the particle system is, yeah, how to use groups to create particle streaming. So I can't think of a lot more. Another one is the display column. By default, it's render, so it shows you exactly how it will show up in the render, but you can change it to point, which is how it originally showed up. You can change it to circle, which just makes them small circles. You can make it cross, which I find useful sometimes for just showing where the particle is. It's the exact same shape as an empty, but what I find useful sometimes is the axis. It shows you little miniature axes of each particle and which direction they are. So right now they're all being emitted in the same direction, but if we had a rotation set up here, then it would rotate them randomly. Let me turn that on so that you can see that. Let me turn this back to render. Let's turn on rotation and see if that affects it in the stock settings. Not so much. You don't really see we would have to play with the settings. Let's go into rotation quickly. So if we just play with the settings like that, as you can see now, you see how they're rotated, and they're rotating actually. So playing with these settings gives you different settings. And so yeah, if you were doing like snowflakes, you might play with this a little bit. If you were doing again asteroids, you would want them rotating very slowly. You can see now how they're just rotating, oh, completely out of control. And so the normal setting right here, they're being rotated from the normal face right here. You can choose global X, so they're just going to be rotated along the X axis only. You can choose like object X, so they'd just be emitted along the object's X. So as you can see, they're just rotating. It's hard to see, I guess, in this timeline, but play with the settings and you'll get a feel for how this works. So like I said, I think that's about all I wanted to show. Let's see. So like when you have rotation, that's where I find this axis setting to be useful, because if you zoom in, you can see each particle, how it's rotated. So that can come in useful sometimes for just tweaking. You can change how much to display. You can do all sorts of things. There's so many settings, I don't even know what to do. Field weights we'll get into later because that doesn't really apply to this. Yeah, that's really about it that I can think of. Now, particle systems are interesting. I'm just going to quickly show this. This is going to be more advanced. So if you go and added, say, a force field and you added I think a wind, and I'm going to rotate it so that it blows in that direction. I'm going to move it down here. Here's a little trick for wind. The stock strength for wind is 1. That is ridiculously small. Blender needs to fix the stock strength. The stock strength should be like 600. Because let me do 1. Let me show you. Okay. You will see that the wind does absolutely nothing. Our particles are emitted and the wind is not affecting them at all. But if I crank this up to like 600, like I said, now watch what happens. Now our wind is really blowing them. So this can create really, really cool things. I think that's a little fast. Is it measured in miles per hour if we did like 60 miles per hour? I think something like, yeah, I think it's measured in miles per hour actually, to be honest. Like if we turn that to like 15 miles per hour, it just barely blow them up and they would probably come back down. Yeah, it just kind of plays, but they die off so fast. So in that case, what we would do is we would go back to our particle system and we would increase, oh, the wrong one again. We would increase, no, I had the right one, didn't I? No, one of these. Okay, there we go, right. So we would turn the lifetime up to like 100 frames. So now you can see how the wind will have more of an effect, how it kind of blows them up and away and such. The wind is still a little strong though, because right now these particles have a mass of 1. Remember how where did we set the mass? I don't even remember where it is most of the time. Physics. So if we turn the mass up, you'll see how the wind changes now. You see how the wind doesn't really affect it because the wind is so slow. If we double the mass from 1 to 2, let's see how that plays out. You can see now how they're kind of blowing up, but they have enough mass that not so much. So let's give them a mass of 5. You can also multiply the mass by the particle size. So the bigger particles have more mass and the smaller particles have less. So that's a good option to use actually because it's very realistic. But let's go back to our force field, our wind, and let's adjust the settings very quickly again. Let's turn the strength up. I kind of want to get these particles like floating in midair, kind of is the effect I was looking for. So I think it still needs more strength. And I think it needs to be this direction and then rotated almost straight up. You can see how it's almost in real, or how it is in real time actually. Let's try something like that and see what happens. Not quite the effect I'm looking for. Like I said, the wind strength really needs to be... There you go. So you can see how they're kind of shot up and then they don't have enough lifetime to come back down. But they would if I increase the lifetime. Let me just play with the wind a little bit. There you go. You can see how the wind now is kind of just barely creating. They're almost hovering. So you can create some really, really interesting effects with different force fields and particle systems. It's a really fun thing to play with, especially once you get, like, you create emissions and stuff on it. So this would be a way you could create like a tornado, for example. If we use something like a magnet, look how it changes. Look how it gets attracted immediately to our object. The particles all get attracted to our magnet. So like I said, this is a really cool way to just create some really interesting effects. The strength, that needs to be rotated. The strength needs to be a lot higher. See how it's repelling right now? So yeah, you can do some pretty darn cool stuff with particle systems and force field effects. Like I said, you can create tornadoes. That's how people create hurricanes, all sorts of stuff. So I'm getting quite longer than I intended to. So that is the intro to particle systems using our group. I actually explained more than I wanted to. I kind of wanted to split this into two parts. In the second part, we are going to go ahead and we're going to create a cool little animation or something. I'm going to come up with an idea to use the particle system more effectively, more than just these simple shapes. I'm going to show you how to create some pretty cool tricks. That's actually what part 2 is going to be, tricks. So we've learned everything actually about the particle systems now. Part 2, I'm going to show you some tricks. So we will see you in part 2 and you're going to learn a whole bunch of cool things. So, thanks for watching from the team here at BlenderTech.com. Again, that's BlenderTech.com. If you enjoyed this video and learned something, please like it and don't forget to subscribe for more Blender, Unity 3D, and programming videos. We now offer hard copies of our videos. If you'd like a copy to download onto your computer to watch later, just let us know and we'll upload it to our servers for you to watch later in the media player of your choice. If you disliked this video for some reason, don't just leave. Instead, leave a comment or email the team at info@blendertech.com about what you did or did not like. We also take requests for a tutorial, so let us know what you want or what you'd like to see more content about. See you next time, and remember, create your way. One last thing to note, if I go and render this, you'll see that my plane is rendered. So make sure that you either move it out of the camera's view or make sure that it's a part of the scene where the particles are emitting from, or simply, there's multiple ways. You can put it in a separate render layer, you can make it completely transparent. There's different tricks and ways to get around that. I'm not going to go into depth through them. Use your creativity. Google it. It's fairly in depth, but the simplest way is to either make it a part of your scene or just move it out of the camera's view. So I just wanted to bring that up also before we ended.